All right, well, here's a few news articles I thought were interesting. There is something called the Windows Terminal. People have told me about it. I've never tried it yet. Certainly, the Microsoft Windows command prompt is an incredibly old beast that dates from, I think, before graphical elements in Windows, from MS-DOS. It has bizarre things like you can't use Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste. So anyway, there's a new terminal. It's been out for a while. I think you can get it in the Windows 10 store, but now it's the default in Windows 11. So might be good to try. People tell me it's better, which I imagine it probably is, because the old one is extremely out of date. So Palo Alto has a authentication bypass vulnerability with a, you can send in a packet that impersonates being administrator and makes you administrator over the firewall. So they patched it and such. It's just kind of funny. Same thing happened to Fortinet recently. And I was just on Paul's security podcast, and he's very upset that these expensive enterprise class devices have such vulnerabilities. I'm less surprised. I think, everything has vulnerabilities. You have to find them and patch them. But anyway, he thinks their development process should be more secure so they prevent such vulnerabilities in the first place, which may be true. And here's Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is a dual-use platform. It's used by legitimate users for penetration tests, and various cracked versions are used by criminals. A Metasploit is the closest alternative for free. Cobalt Strike is proprietary and costs money. And you run a server, and then you make malware and put it on machines, and then you can control them. And as best as I can understand this, the server has a vulnerability where you can execute code on the server, but in order to do that, you have to be able to send properly encrypted stuff as if you were a client, so you can only do this from a machine that has been owned by that server, which would seem to be to greatly lower the importance of the vulnerability. But anyway, it does mean that if these guys were to take over your machine with Cobalt Strike and put you in a sort of a botnet, you could attack, conquer the Cobalt Strike server and steal the botnet from somebody and such. Anyway, they got a new version of Cobalt Strike to patch that, so people that are running the old ones have some degree of vulnerability to this attack. But like I say, it sounds like that vulnerability is not too high because only a small number of people could attack you. This I found very interesting. Now that the red states have largely outlawed abortion, there's an enormous number of women that need to get an abortion that cannot get one legally, and this is what I thought. I was involved in abortion protests years ago, decades ago, when the RU-486 came out, the abortion drug, and now they got an abortion drug. I don't know if it's the same stuff, but there's a very well-known abortion drug, mifepristone and something else, names like that. They're 2 pills. It's extremely safe. You can just take them at home, and so there's an underground railroad of people. They buy the stuff in Mexico, where they could buy it for like $12, and then they found out you can buy it in India, where they make it for like $1.50 per dose. So they buy tons of it in India, they take it to Mexico, they package it and mail it to volunteers in America who redistribute it illegally to women that need an abortion in red states, and they do it all for free because it costs so little money. They got a few people that donate to them. I was thinking of donating to them myself. It seems like a wonderful idea. Anyway, it's very interesting to read about these people, and the legal risk actually of doing this sounds relatively small. They say 60 people or so have been accused or charged with illegal distribution of abortion pills so far in America. So, although that'd probably go up. Theoretically, the punishment could be very extreme in red states. Prison time, and some of them even talk about charging people with murder for performing abortions, and sometimes they even talk about charging women with murder for getting abortions, which is what they did in the Middle Ages in Britain. Most of the red state politicians have tried to avoid directly prosecuting the women because that would really be unpopular, but prosecuting the doctors and people who drive them to the clinic and stuff is pretty standard. That's part of the Texas law. So anyway, we are developing a considerable underground. This is what I thought. I thought an abortion ban in America would have no possibility of succeeding now because all you have to do is get a readily available illegal drug. So it should be no more difficult than getting something like marijuana or LSD or cocaine, all of which any of us could get anytime you want to, very easily. So if all you need to do is get an illegal drug, that would seem to be essentially impossible to stop. We haven't been able to stop any of the other illegal drugs, so the trade goes on. Of course, an awful lot of women that need abortions are like teenagers in abusive relationships. They don't speak English. They don't understand the system. They have no money at all, not even to drive somewhere. And so they can't get it even when it's a relatively simple thing, relatively easy to get. But anyway, these groups try to make it easier. All right, so this I expected. As I mentioned in many of these classes, Biden is having a student debt relief program, and on its face, this is completely illegal what he's doing. And so there are many Republican lawsuits trying to block it, and now they're appealing one of them up to Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. So we'll see what she does, and we'll see how these lawsuits come out. Of course, it would be nice for the students with debts to be forgiven, but procedurally, this is an outrage, in my opinion, and that's what the Republicans think too, because the president is not allowed to just spend money like that. The way the American system works, the president does not get the ability to allocate money. He has to go to Congress. And this was done by the president with a presidential executive order on the grounds that even though it abuses his power, he will not be able to win in court. So that's what we're going to see. Many court battles are underway. They did, however, open a form, and people are already filling out that form to try to get these forgiveness of their student debt. So if it is blocked in court, the Democrats will be humiliated again, like they were with BBB. The Democrats seem to keep setting themselves up by promising everybody something they really want and then not being able to really deliver it. They seem to make the same sort of political mistake many times. But maybe this will be very popular, I guess, if it goes through. This is something Paul mentioned on Paul's Security podcast. I missed it. It's back in July. Cosmic Strand was a UEFI firmware rootkit. We talked about this for decades. A theory in principle, you could infect your computer, not in the operating system and not on the hard drive, but in the firmware on the motherboard. And that's what this does. This infects the firmware on your motherboard for certain devices, which are Gigabyte or Asus motherboards. And of course, you infect the motherboard, then replacing the hard drive completely, reinstalling the OS and all that has no effect. No antivirus does anything. That's why this has been scary forever. And apparently, this has been around for a while. There really are these attacks, so it's pretty scary. And this was pretty scary too. I saw this just today. Again, Paul Asadorian on Paul Security Podcast sent out a list of news sources to look at, and I started looking there, and I found this one from MDSec, who writes the book I'm using in the Android hacking class, the hacking mobile devices class. It's a very good book, a very good company, and what they say is LastPass, which is the password manager I use, has terrifying vulnerabilities. The first thing is it stores the passwords unencrypted in memory, and apparently in the memory of many processes. It connects to other processes, I guess, so it can fill in the password, and it puts the password in memory. And then there's something I couldn't quite understand, saying it's in the Google Chrome process if you're using Google Chrome, and they say under certain conditions, Google Chrome has something called remote debugging. And I don't think that's on all the time, but apparently under certain circumstances, it's possible to have something turned on called remote debugging. And I didn't completely understand what they're saying, but it seems to imply that people could remotely over the network get at the memory of that Chrome process and then in principle find your LastPass passwords in there. So that is pretty scary. But again, I'm not, and I still think everybody should use password managers, because otherwise what you're going to do is use the same password everywhere, and that's even worse. But perhaps these are flaws that the password managers could address. I'd also have no reason to believe that LastPass is any worse than the others. But anyway, it's interesting research. And this is from a red team point of view, saying when you're doing a pen test, if you want to get in people's LastPasses after you get like execution on their laptop, you can in fact get some of the passwords out of LastPass, which is pretty interesting. I didn't know that would be possible at all, but apparently it is. And it would be sort of fun to try this and see how many passwords we can actually get. There's something called Microsoft Office Online Server, which is the Office web apps server. So you have a browser-based viewer for Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and OneNote. I've never used this. It sounds like it duplicates the function of Office 365, so I'm not quite sure what the point of it is. But anyway, it's some Microsoft product to provide access to Office, and it's got a vulnerability. Server-side request forgery, which is one that came up this morning in a class I was teaching in secure coding. They found I put a server-side request forgery in the vulnerable app they were hacking at the request of a manager, and I thought nobody will ever find this, and somebody found it today. It's a relatively subtle web vulnerability, And here it can be used to get remote execution on the server itself. Yeah, LastPass UF2, so student, U2F support, and haven't found that LastPass had supported U2F, which protocol the security keys use. Yes, yeah, that's interesting. Some people like that. People get these hardware security keys, and they would, of course, like their password manager to accept it. I see some articles about various password managers and their degree of support for that. I didn't know about LastPass. However, using a second hardware token to secure your LastPass would seem like a good idea, but if it then puts the passwords in memory where they can be stolen, then that's another vulnerability, but still. The main point of the security token is it stops other people from using it, which is good. Anyway, this group called Cotopaxi had stores in San Francisco, and I've seen a lot of stories like this. They got many break-ins. A diner I could just got broken in this morning at 4 in the morning. There's a lot of crime in San Francisco, and these guys just got broken over and over and over, and the police couldn't do anything, and they finally just closed and left. A lot of companies are doing this. The crime and the homeless people and the rampant drug use in downtown San Francisco is a disgrace, and our mayor's been talking tough about it, and we had a whole recall of a whole bunch of government officials about this, but so far nothing seems to have been done. And so Mark Zuckerberg is, of course, pushing the metaverse. That's his big thing. And he claims that by having everybody show up as these sort of cartoonish avatars, which I guess I don't get a picture of them, you often do. They look simple, flat, plain cartoonish avatars, that this way you can have some body language, but it's not as stressful as being on camera all the time. And therefore your boss will be sure you're really there. And they see an enormous number of bosses when interviewed very much disapprove of remote work. They really want to know students, the workers are right there on campus, making sure you can watch them and make sure they're really working. So we'll see. I know many people like working from home and they're very reluctant to go back into the office. A lot of bosses want them to, but a lot of people are not interested in doing that. Anyway, let me stop the news.